Hello, kindred spirits, and welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Reagan Duffy, and with me is my lovely co-host, Kelly Gerner.
Hey there, kindred spirits.
Before we start, we have something fun to share. Last week, we were just on the Swoon-worthy podcast talking all about the 1985 Anne of Green Gables miniseries that we all love. We'll put a link in our show notes for that episode, so please go and check it out. Swoon-worthy has lots of episodes on all your favorite period dramas and TV shows. If a fantastic costume or fantastic period drama is your jam, go check out that podcast. Before we launch into our second episode about Rilla of Ingleside's character arc, I think we have to pause for just a quick second so Kelly can relate to us her spiritual experience at the Hozier concert last week. Kelly, tell us about it.
Oh my God. Any excuse to talk about Hozier. I'm a huge fangirl. So for the uninitiated, Hozier is the Irish singer-songwriter who had a huge hit about 15 years ago with Take Me to Church. And then he had another pretty big hit about 2 years ago with Too Sweet. You definitely know that song. It's the I Take My Whiskey Neat. It's that song. So you've heard that on the radio. And although those two singles are very spread out, Hozier has been making soulful, politically motivated, densely literate music all along. He is definitely a nerdy girl's rock star. And in fact, his most recent album is inspired by Dante's journeys through hell in the Divine Comedy.
So, oh my God, talk about densely literate. This totally goes with the fact that you just finished reading Calabasas.
Yes, it does. I was thinking about that while I was watching the concert. I was like, I am walking through the circles of hell. This is great. I mean, in a good way, in a romantic way, question mark? I don't know. You have to be there. It's very hard to describe. This was actually my first chance to see him live, even though I've been a fan for ages. And it ended up being a really special show because he was playing at a music festival in Dana Point, which is where I live now. The festival is right on the beach. Lots of locals will even go out on their surfboards and listen, which is really fun.
That is cool.
It is so cool. Yeah. It was a magical show, like soft ocean breezes, a phenomenal crowd, just really passionate and soulful and like everything you want out of a great show. And as I was telling Reagan before we started, I had such an amazing time that I just booked an impromptu trip to see him in Las Vegas this upcoming weekend.
Amazing. Go. Have a fantastic time. You should have 2 magical experiences back to back.
I certainly hope so. So anyway, go see Hozier, I guess, is my recommendation for this show. Or, listen to his albums. All right, everybody. We always say that Kindred Spirits Book Club is more than just a podcast. It's a community. And one of the best places to keep that conversation going is on Instagram at kindredspirits.bookclub. We share announcements, guest info, giveaways, and most importantly, lots of bookish joy over there. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us a DM and say hello. And if this podcast has been brightening your week, would you please take a minute to rate or review us? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, wherever you listen. It is a small thing, but it really does help other listeners find their way to our little book club family.
For our kindred spirit of the episode today, we are going to do something a little different. We are going to honor Armistice Day, or what is known as Remembrance Day in Canada and Veterans Day in the US. That's November 11th. So if you are listening to the episodes as they come out, that was just earlier this week. On November 11th, 1918, Germany and the Allies signed the armistice for the cessation of hostilities to take effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month on the Western Front of World War I. The armistice had to be extended several times until a formal peace agreement was reached at the Treaty of Versailles. And now, November 11th, in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth countries observe a 2-minute silence on the 11th hour in remembrance of armed forces members who have died in the line of duty. Poppies are commonly worn in remembrance, and services include laying wreaths to honor the fallen. The United States is a little different. Veterans Day honors living veterans, and we use Memorial Day in May to honor fallen service members. So, in honor of the armistice, our kindred spirits of the episode are those we remember who gave their life in the line of duty in World War I and in all other wars.
So for our quote of the episode, we had to choose this quote from Rilla upon the news of the armistice. Just for one moment, I'm really feeling quite young again. Young and frivolous and silly. Did I ever say November was an ugly month? Why, it's the most beautiful month in the whole year. Listen to the bells ringing in Rainbow Valley. I never heard them so clearly. They're ringing for peace and new happiness and all the dear, sweet, sane, homey things that we can have again now, Miss Oliver. Not that I am sane just now. I don't pretend to be. The whole world is having its little crazy spell today. Soon we'll be sobered down and keep faith and begin to build up our new world. But just for today, let's be mad and glad.
And let's move into our story club. Today in Story Club, we are going to continue our character study of Rilla Blythe. If you remember, we are using Anne's famous quote from the beginning of Green Gables. Would you rather be dazzlingly clever, divinely beautiful, or angelically good to shape our discussion of Rilla's character? In our previous episode, we talked about how Rilla's journey around the value of beauty and romance was very different than Anne's. Whereas Anne's vanity was steeped in the sure belief she would never be beautiful and thus was unlovable, Rilla has a complete opposite experience, knowing she's both beautiful and lovable, and needing to find identity beyond that, as the First World War is making beauty somewhat unnecessary as an ideal. Today, we are going to talk about the value of dazzling cleverness and Rilla. And here again, we see that Rilla is rather the opposite of Anne. In fact, in this regard, Rilla is the opposite of so many of our favorite girl heroines. Think about all of our classic girl protagonists. Besides Anne herself, we've got Jo March, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Matilda, Harriet the Spy, Meg Murray from A Wrinkle in Time, Elizabeth Bennet, Belle from Beauty and the Beast. I'm sure you can think of many, many more. All known for being intelligent and clever, which is why readers love them. Even in Maud's own works, her main characters are often well known for their intelligence. Emily, the story girl, Valancy, Jane, all smart girls, observant and capable. And intelligent and clever girl protagonists are often very ambitious. They aren't just smart, they're itching to learn, to do, to grow, to experience. Many are writers. Most are voracious readers. As readers ourselves, we're often very drawn to those aspects. We see ourselves in those characters. They also make for sharp, interesting narrators to experience the story through. But Rilla, we're going to reuse a quote that we shared last episode here because it so perfectly sums up Rilla at the start of the book. Not only does it sum her up, she herself says it. She's owning who she is right here. She says, "There's 5 of us going to college already. Surely that's enough. There's bound to be one dunce in every family. I'm quite willing to be a dunce if I can be a pretty, popular, delightful one. I can't be clever. I have no talent at all. And you can't imagine how comfortable it is. Nobody expects me to do anything, so I'm never pestered to do it. I can't be a housewifely, cookly creature either. I hate sewing and dusting. And when Susan couldn't teach me to make biscuits, nobody could. Father says, I toil not, neither do I spin. Therefore, I must be a lily of the field." Not only is Rilla saying she's not clever, she's also saying she has no ambition around education and career or talent. She's not particularly interested in developing it either. She doesn't consider it a deficit, and because she's much beloved, she's never felt like she must earn admiration or a place in the world. In fact, not having any talent or cleverness feels comfortable to her. There's nothing she has to live up to or strive for. She can simply be loved and be lovable.
Anne, at the same age, had heaps of ambition as well as brains. Not only was she clever, she worked hard in school, she showed intense focus to achieve her goals, whether it was being the top of the class, going to Queen's, becoming a teacher, going to Redmond. I mean, Anne had ambition. Anne's intelligence was one of the traits that really saved her during her neglected childhood. She soaked up learning from meager scraps here and there, and she developed a love for written language that gave her an avenue for her imagination. And it also showed her that the world was bigger than her circumstances. And then when she was at Green Gables, there was a part of Anne that felt like she had to achieve like great academic heights, not just to make Matthew proud, but to make up for the fact that she wasn't the boy they had wanted to help on the farm. She was kind of using that as a way to prove herself worthy of Matthew and Marilla's love. And then intelligence, cleverness, and ambition are so much a part of Anne's story that they even marked Anne's relationship with Gilbert. You know, we saw this when at first she competed with him at school. Then they studied together by correspondence course in Anne of Avonlea. Their ambition and intelligence drew them together. Anne could be her cleverest self with Gilbert. Even before they had made up, Gilbert's intelligence was what made Anne want to be friends with him in the first place. She watched him walk home from Queens with Ruby and thought to herself, if Gilbert had ever walked home with her from the train, over the crisp fields and along the ferny byways, they might have had many and merry and interesting conversations about their hopes and ambitions therein. Anne also wanted to be published, and she was full of story ideas. She didn't just become a teacher after Queen's, she wanted to make a real difference in her students' lives. She wanted to inspire them. She not only went to college, she was bent on achieving high marks and scholarships. And then she went on to be a principal at a prestigious high school, right? Like there's no point in Anne's journey where she is anything less than striving and ambitious. Part of it, of course, is her natural inclination, but it's also this way that she's proving herself. Now, her daughter Rilla, in contrast, thinks all that must be nice for other people, but why study when you can enjoy a summer day, or dance with young men, or wear pretty clothes? And this setup is interesting because it doesn't make Rilla particularly likable at first. Although her insight and frank acceptance of herself tell us there's a little more to her than just a frivolous nature, right? She's not deluded. She knows who she is.
Well, and the frankness in which she kind of knows this about herself sort of tells us that, yeah, there's a lot more beneath the surface.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because we don't see enough in this book about Rilla's relationships with her older sisters, Nan and Di, to know if the reason that Rilla is sort of opting out of being clever is to avoid comparison to them. But I think maybe we can guess that that's at work there to some level. We do know that Rilla prefers hanging out with the quieter Una Meredith over her sister Faith Meredith, quote, whose beauty and aplomb rather overshadowed other girls. And Rilla did not enjoy being overshadowed. You know, it wouldn't be uncommon for the youngest child to just sort of opt out of perceived competition with older siblings. Rilla might claim being the pretty and popular one, rather than compete with her older sisters who are both headed to Redmond College in the fall. When Gertrude Oliver asks if Rilla intends to go to college in the fall, Rilla does say, no, nor any other fall. I don't want to. I never cared for all those ologies and isms Nan and Di are so crazy about. I can't be clever.
Actually, that kind of makes me wonder here, what do you think Anne thinks about Rilla? In Anne's girlhood, she was desperate for learning. She sought it out wherever she could, and she was so grateful for the chance for an education that Marilla and Matthew gave her. It was a big financial sacrifice for them to continue Anne's education by sending her to Queens and then on to Redmond. It was not something that was just a guarantee for her financially. She never took her chance for an education for granted. Anne's children, on the other hand, never had to know any lack or neglect. They are able to pursue all their educational goals with the full emotional and financial support from Anne and Gilbert. They even have a leg up. They're being raised by two educators, two educated people, in the kind of household where poetry and world news are part of the regular dinner time conversation. In this book, the Blythes are even hosting the village school teacher. They value education. Rilla takes this so much for granted that she doesn't even want it. But then again, just because as parents we really strive to give our kids everything we didn't have, that doesn't always mean our kids are going to want those gifts.
I have to say, Reagan, thinking about Anne and Gilbert as parents, you know, they both taught school. Obviously, Gilbert has an advanced degree. Anne has her BA, right? Incredibly educated people. It made me think about sometimes, like, it's inevitable that I became a lawyer because my dad was a lawyer and his dad was a lawyer. And we just sort of like grew up talking about law around the dinner table. So I'm a lawyer. My next brother is a lawyer. And then our youngest brother is our family's Rilla. And he took like one look at that and was like, miss me with all that.
Do you think he ever thought to himself, I can't be clever. I'm okay being a dunce as long as I could be the pretty popular dunce?
I don't know if he ever... I think maybe sub out pretty popular with good at sports.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think about Maud writing an unambitious, not particularly academic girl?
Well, I think there's maybe two things going on here. I mean, in the most like literal sense, like just in like the story construction sense of it all, Maud is giving her main character a place to begin this coming of age story. So if Rilla is unambitious and sort of parochial, uninterested in applying herself to any serious undertaking, then that's the beginning of her journey, right? She's going to become someone who broadens her horizons, who becomes invested in improving herself.
Oh, you know what? That actually makes me think a little bit that because Rilla doesn't have circumstances to overcome at this stage in the book, whereas Anne it starts her journey by having to overcome her poor circumstances and her traumatic background. Rilla doesn't have any trauma to overcome at this point. She kind of has to overcome herself.
Yeah. She does. She has to overcome her own circumstances, which is like a life of privilege, right? A little bit of hardship needs to be introduced in order for Rilla to become the best version of herself.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I was thinking about this a little bit, though, is I wonder if Maud, we know that she kind of favors more ambitious heroines, probably because she's like writing to that part in herself. So I wonder if she kind of wanted to set herself the challenge of writing a girl who wasn't like her.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most compelling reason that Maud wrote this wartime coming-of-age story about a girl who is seemingly unambitious and frivolous, as Rilla is really to underscore the tragedy of the war. And there's no question that the war is deeply tragic in the violence that caused so much loss of life and bloodshed and injury. But another tragedy of the war was the loss of innocence for the young women and girls across the world. Instead of being able to have a free-spirited, unfettered girlhood, they had to grow up very quickly and become what the country needed. So these early introductory chapters are showing the readers kind of what should have been Rilla's youth, so we can appreciate how different the years to come are going to be. In our previous episode about Rilla and beauty, we speculated that Maud wrote Rilla to be a little vain and very beautiful to contrast that value with the ugliness of war. We talked about, what use is beauty in wartime, right? What good does it do, Rilla? What use is it to be a charming flirt when all the young men in town are enlisted? We were playing with those same ideas with the theme of cleverness as well. Is there a similarity here in depicting Rilla as unambitious or not as traditionally academic? Is the question, what use is a college degree when Canada needs their women to be the practical, domestic backbone of the country? I don't totally know if we have an answer for that. We know that Nan and Di and Faith all work very hard for the Red Cross while they are still at Redmond College, so it's not like they're shut away in an ivory tower. Their brains and cleverness and ambition is channeled into their support of the war. I don't think that Maud is making the case that higher education is useless in a time of war, but I think she is showing the reader how the young women of this time would have applied their education and skills to the war effort. And what Nan, Di, and Faith are doing is very different from what Rilla and her friends her age can do.
And I think making the point that the education and the college education isn't the only way to make a significant difference.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So that brings us to the idea of what is the definition of clever that Maud is using, both here in Rilla's case and in other places in her writing. Is cleverness academic achievement and wit? Is cleverness more about ambition, a willingness to focus on learning? Or is it a more general idea of cleverness about intelligence and observation and knowing how and when to utilize knowledge? So as we were kind of thinking about those meta ideas of what do we mean by cleverness, I had a thought, and not to get all nerdy here, but it does make me think of Dungeons and Dragons stats. So stay with me here, kindred spirits. I promise you, we're going to connect this. Kelly and I have played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with our husbands over the last 12 years. So this is a framing we naturally bring a lot to our real life discussions. It is not unusual for some of our regular discussions to devolve into the D&D of it all.
I mean, this is going to make sense, everyone. Just go with it.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a 1-minute primer, and then we're going to talk about how it connects. The important thing to know is that in Dungeons and Dragons, every character is made up of 6 core attributes, and your stats indicate how much or how little of each trait your character has. And that can either help you or hurt you when you're trying to do different tasks. So the core attributes are strength, dexterity, and constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So basically what that means is that if you have a high strength stat and you're trying to kick down a door, you have a better chance of succeeding with a lot of strength. If you have a low strength stat, you're going to be at a disadvantage kicking down a door. If you want to pick a lock, you're going to be helped by high dexterity, hindered by low dexterity. Constitution is basically how hardy you are, how much damage or injury you can take, or how resilient you might be physically. And I think we can dismiss strength, dexterity, and constitution from this conversation in regards to Rilla. Those are physical stats, and they're related to how you physically interact with the world.
Right. I don't think that Rilla is going to be fighting any dragons.
Or even kicking down doors.
No.
The other three stats are more mental stats. The interesting thing I'm thinking about when we are talking about cleverness here is the difference and overlap between intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. In D&D, these are all specifically different. Intelligence is book smartness, having a lot of knowledge, being able to figure out riddles or puzzles and the like. Intelligence is about deductive reasoning and acquired knowledge. Wisdom is knowing how to apply knowledge in particular situations, seeing a bigger picture, having a strong intuition and common sense. Wisdom is often about perception, observation, and good judgment. So a character can be intelligent but not wise, or vice versa. A good example from pop culture of a high intelligence, low wisdom character is Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, or any of those absent-minded professor types in pop culture. So the ones who are really brilliant in any applied academic ways, but can't make themselves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You could easily argue that Penny from The Big Bang Theory is the opposite. Lots of common sense, understands how people work, knows how the world works, but she doesn't have a lot of academic knowledge. I've also seen people point to Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove or Forrest Gump as extreme versions of high wisdom, low intelligence.
Yeah, so I think those high wisdom, low intelligence characters are really interesting. And another common example of a high wisdom, low intelligence character is Luke Skywalker from the original Star Wars movie. Luke doesn't know anything about being a Jedi when that movie starts. He doesn't know anything about the broader intergalactic political situation, but Luke has killer instincts. Remember his famous line, "I've got a bad feeling about this." And of course, he has this really natural aptitude for the Force and for flying spaceships.
Do not let your husband hear you say that.
I couldn't think of what
X-wings
for a second.
He flies an X-wing.
I was like, a rocket? Are those rockets?
Oh, wait. Does he fly an X-wing? What does Darth Vader fly?
Does he fly
TIE fighter?
TIE fighter?
Darth Vader flies a TIE fighter. Luke flies an X-wing.
An X-wing. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay. And of course, a great deal of natural aptitude for the Force. In fact, I think that a lot of characters who are just starting out on their hero's journey fit this archetype. These are characters who are going to have a lot of innate natural wisdom and an innate aptitude, but they haven't really had an opportunity to develop it.
Right.
And then charisma is the other mental stat that Reagan was referring to, and that's the ability to influence other, right? Charisma. So that usually involves warmth, confidence, eloquence, the ability to make others feel good or important, and convince other people to follow their leadership. Some charismatic people are very charming, some are commanding. There are some different ways that it shows up. We can all probably think of very high charisma people in our lives, but some good examples from pop culture are like Ted Lasso. I love Ted Lasso.
Yeah, I thought of that because we just started watching that with Alice.
Oh, I love Ted Lasso. And he's a perfect example of a high charisma character, right? He's extremely warm, very good at making other people feel good, very good at winning over people who are initially resistant to him. Elle Woods from Legally Blonde is also extremely high charisma. And I think when you have that confluence of like a high charisma character and a high wisdom character, those people can often be very influential because they'd be able to apply their charisma at the most effective time and place. They kind of know how to work a room.
Yeah. So now that we are kind of using that way of differentiating intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, how do we think Maud is defining cleverness? And how do we think Rilla is defining it? Because initially it seems like Rilla is defining cleverness akin to the D&D intelligence. She specifically ties it to book learning, right? The ability to acquire knowledge. She says Nan and Di are interested in ologies and isms, and Rilla isn't. Young Anne also seemed to define cleverness as both academic intelligence and motivation, kind of a combo of those two things. But I think we see over the course of the book that while Rilla may not have an interest in the academic knowledge that her sisters, her mother, even Miss Oliver prize, that doesn't mean she doesn't have a higher intelligence than she gives herself credit for. Intelligence in the D&D definition of acquired knowledge at any rate, and the ability to acquire knowledge. What we find for Rilla is that once she has more motivation spurred on by the war and the new needs in her community, she actually acquires knowledge at a very good clip. We suspect that Gilbert sees that Rilla has untapped potential and just needs some motivation to begin to develop it. When Rilla brings Jims home, a spur of the moment good deed, an instinct she didn't entirely think through, Gilbert declares that if the baby is to stay, either in the immediate short term or for longer, it will have to be Rilla's responsibility. Everyone else in the house is busy already. Maud tells us, quote, the doctor walked out of the kitchen looking very stern and immovable. In his heart, he knew quite well that the small inhabitant of the big soup tureen would remain at Ingleside, but he meant to see if Rilla could not be induced to rise to the occasion. So we don't know for sure, but I think we can infer here that Gilbert is challenging Rilla, challenging her in a way she's never needed to be challenged before. And whether that's because he wants to see his youngest daughter become more than just a sweet, pretty face, or because the advent of war means that she must become more than just a pretty face, we aren't told exactly. What do you think about that, Cal?
Well, I just love this moment for both Gilbert and Rilla. Gilbert is a physician, a father of 6, and he knows full well how challenging it is to care for a new baby. And he does have a gentle heart, so we know he's not going to turn the baby out, but he also wants Rilla to be accountable for her impulsive decision. Rilla is the youngest, she's the most spoiled, the least ambitious of the Blythe children, and I can bet that she has probably escaped responsibility on many occasions. But now everyone is feeling the impact of the war. Everyone is stretched thin. And this is just not the time to bring an infant to your mother or your housekeeper and say, hey, here's a new project I found for you.
Have fun.
Have fun. Here's baby. Maybe under different circumstances that would have worked, but not now. And so Gilbert is acknowledging that Rilla's compassion for baby Jims is admirable, and it does demonstrate her excellent instincts for caregiving, but making this unilateral decision to introduce an infant into the household, that comes with natural consequences, and Gilbert wants her to be accountable for that decision. So I do think that Gilbert is issuing a challenge to Rilla. He, Anne, and Susan can give her information and tools, but the responsibility of caring for Jims must be Rilla's alone. Thinking back to my Luke Skywalker comparison, I think Gilbert is the Obi-Wan to Rilla's Luke Skywalker. He will give her the education. He'll tell her all about the Force and the Jedis, but the application, actually doing it, that has to be all her own.
Amazing. Is Morgan like Yoda?
Morgan is Yoda, correct. A little bit later in the book, we hear Gilbert say this. You're all good stuff, said the doctor. I'm proud of my women folk. Even Rilla here, my lily of the field, is running a Red Cross Society full blast and saving a little life for Canada. That's a good piece of work. So he's very proud of her. Now, what I think is very interesting is that Rilla does not avail herself of the expertise of her parents and Susan all that often when raising Jims. She truly takes Gilbert at face value when he tells her that she cannot trouble her mother or Susan with the baby, and she becomes determined to raise Jims with minimal help from her parents or from Susan, all of whom, by the way, have a great deal of experience in this realm. Now, it doesn't mean she never gets any help, but Rilla does think to herself on her very first night with the baby, quote, she would get a book on baby hygiene and be beholden to nobody. She would never go to father for advice. She wouldn't bother mother, and she would only condescend to Susan in dire extremity. She's so determined to do this by herself and not trouble anyone that this 15-year-old girl basically teaches herself how to raise a baby from a book. Rilla tells us that she had not ever been interested in babies before Jims, so I think we can assume she hasn't had any occasion to acquire knowledge about raising babies before this. And as the youngest, of course, in her family, she hasn't even observed, her siblings being raised, like some other kids might have. So to us, this really is very much an example of Rilla's intelligence and her ability to engage with academic learning. It might not be the kind of academic learning as if she were studying Shakespeare, but Rilla becomes an expert on the most modern and quote-unquote scientific child-rearing methods thanks to the fictional book, Morgan on the Care of Infants. But that was a book that was based on real child-rearing manuals at the time.
Right. Teaching yourself how to raise a baby from a book is very intelligent.
Yes.
And Rilla doesn't just learn to become a competent caregiver, she also takes on more responsibility in the kitchen. Early in the book, Rilla also says that she could never be a housewifely cookly creature, meaning that cooking and cleaning and those domestic tasks were beyond her. Imagine Marilla Cuthbert realizing that her granddaughter does not have any of those skills.
I know. It makes me think of that scene from Anne's House of Dreams where Mrs. Lynde is visiting for Christmas, and she tells Marilla that she knows that Anne is a good housekeeper because her bread box and her scrap pail are clean. And of course she says, well, that's all down to you and all of, the housekeeping expertise that you passed on to her. But as we've been discussing, Rilla is not her mother in many ways, and I guess housekeeping is among them. She had said if Susan couldn't teach her to bake biscuits, then no one could.
But in the face of sufficient inspiration, Rilla does in fact learn to cook. She wants to be able to make treats to send to the boys off at war and admits that she hadn't really tried to learn before. She writes in her diary, quote, Susan says it is all in the way I hold my mouth, and Father says my subconscious mind is desirous of learning now, and I dare say they're both right. I mean, I think it's funny. Basically, Susan and Gilbert are saying the same thing, more or less, just in different ways. Now that Rilla wants to learn the skill, she can do it. Rilla even says she got ambitious and tried to make cream puffs, which were a bit of a disaster, but she can make good fruitcake and shortbread. Rilla takes on other household skills like learning to knit now that socks are needed for the war effort. She learns to sew well to make sheets, bandages, and vermin shirts for the soldiers. So we see that when Rilla is determined to, she can acquire knowledge with the best of them. I wonder if being raised in a house with such smart, knowledgeable academic people as Anne and Gilbert, as Jem studying to be a doctor, as Walter touched by artistic genius, Rilla assumes that cleverness looks only a certain way. And since she's not academically interested, she's opted out of identifying as clever altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that does make a lot of sense. And I think I can understand it from Rilla's perspective. Because, especially being the youngest, by the time she's even old enough to understand schooling and to make that sort of cleverness academic connection, she already has all these older kids in her life. Not just her siblings, but also the Merediths, who are all so like quick-witted and capable and smart about so many things. And then add to that someone like Walter, who has that very particular literary genius. And meanwhile, Rilla, the only feedback she ever gets from her family is that she's pretty, so she just leans into it. Why compete against all of that genius when being pretty and sweet is working perfectly well?
And if we take into account Rilla's age and her stage of development, teenagerhood is when you are developing a sense of identity. And we often, in early teenagerhood, kind of have narrow and reductive ways of thinking about our identity, right? Like, I'm a goth, so I shall never wear pink. I'm a theater kid. I don't run. That's what my daughter says all the time, where she's all like, no sports. I'm a theater kid, right? And she's got friends who are like, I'm athletic. I don't sing, right? This idea that you find your identity. Yeah, and that defines you. And so whether just based on how old Rilla is when the book starts, that also contributes partly to it.
She's so young in those early chapters, right? She's not yet 15.
Right.
So we're really talking about like a 14-year-old child. So I think that makes so much sense. She sees her sisters and Faith off at college doing amazing things, and she's all like, yep.
That's not me.
Not me. But I think another aspect of intelligence when it comes to Rilla that, we start to uncover over the course of this book is motivation, right? We talked about how she doesn't consider herself ambitious, and certainly she's not ambitious the way Anne was ambitious, but the war ends up providing some of the motivation that Rilla needed to engage her skills and inspire her learning. So the war ends up providing like a deeper kind of ambition for Rilla. She needs to learn these new skills now, right? She's not baking for no reason. She's baking to support these boys overseas. Now it's not just for herself, it's for other people, it's for her community, it's for her nation. She also sees how much the other people in her life are doing and giving, and she wants to be useful. The war becomes, perhaps in this like unexpected way, this key to unlocking Rilla's ambition after all. I suspect that if the war had required Rilla to learn code breaking or calculus, she would have applied herself with equal determination to acquire that necessary knowledge, just as she did some of these closer to home skills. Rilla's organizational skills get another moment to shine when she takes the reins in planning Miranda Pryor's war wedding. And we have to say, Rilla's executive functioning is top notch. This is very much one of those skills that is underrated, particularly because, it's something that often women are very good at. But event planning, whether it's like a backyard barbecue or a massive corporate conference, that is something that requires a great deal of intelligence. You have to juggle a lot of hats to pull that off.
Yeah, very much so.
So here's the moment in the text when Rilla takes charge, as Miranda is declaring that it's impossible for her to marry Joe before he leaves for the front. Why? briefly demanded the organizer of the Junior Red Cross and the transporter of babies in soup tureens. Rilla Blythe thought hard and rapidly for a few minutes. Then she said, "Miranda, if you will put yourself into my hands, I'll have you married to Joe before 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." And then she does exactly that. She tracks down Joe on the military base to tell him to get the license. She makes over one of her own white dresses for Miranda. She organizes Susan to make a wedding cake. She helps her mother and Susan make all sorts of dishes for the wedding supper. She invites all the families and the guests. She makes arrangements for Mr. Meredith to marry them, and she serves as bridesmaid. She does this like in a matter of hours. Rilla is extraordinarily capable, especially compared to Miranda, who doesn't even have the wherewithal to call Joe herself. Rilla also finds that she has a talent for recitation, and she becomes much in demand at these recruiting meetings. Now, granted, some of that success is due to her beauty, combined with like the stirring words, but that talent is also Rilla's talent. And having found that passion inside herself that she didn't know that she had. So she also has this in common with Anne, who also excelled at recitations. In Anne of Green Gables, Anne's ability to give a stirring, affecting recitation is one of the ways that Anne demonstrates her cleverness. So there's no reason that that wouldn't apply to Rilla as well. That also kind of goes to that natural charisma that both Anne and Rilla possess. It just looks a little different in each of them.
But we also have the other definition of cleverness, if we want to borrow our D&D stats again, and that's the idea of wisdom. Rilla may not be book smart, but she's deeply observant. We see the war through her diary. She's capturing not just what's happening in the war, but what's happening to each member of her family. She's got a much keener eye than I suspect she knows herself. Rilla's keen eye and social astuteness serves her well in starting the Junior Red Cross. She immediately knows who to get to be president, knowing that she's too young for the other girls to accept her in that office. Quote, "So here was Rilla hemming sheets and organizing a Junior Red Cross in her thoughts as she hemmed. Moreover, she was enjoying it. The organizing, that is, not the hemming. It was interesting, and Rilla discovered a certain aptitude in herself for it that surprised her. Rilla runs through various people for the offices, and then she thinks, as for the various committees, they must be chosen after the juniors were organized. But Rilla knew just who should be put on which. So Rilla's organized, she's socially savvy, she's able to understand the scope of this project. That sounds pretty clever to me."
I just love the image of Rilla quietly sewing while she's sort of like plotting out the organizational structure of the Junior Red Cross. Here's this pretty picture of this young girl sweetly sewing away, but in her mind, she's out there playing three-dimensional chess.
Right. Rilla predicts the debate over whether they should have lunch at their meetings and manages to finagle a win for her side. It does sound like the Junior Reds have a lot of drama. I mean, even in war, teens will be teens. And Rilla manages them all and helps direct their focus on concrete things they can do to help. That's a pretty remarkable thing. Rilla arranges the concert to raise money to aid the Belgians. She's really discovering her own competence here, again with the event planning. She arranges the program, cajoles everyone into participating, runs the rehearsals, makes contingency plans, decorates the venue. She even figures out how to manipulate Irene Howard into taking part. At this point, Irene and Rilla have had a significant rift. Irene tries to play coy to get Rilla to beg her to participate, but Rilla cannily clocks that and chooses the opposite approach, taking Irene's barbed excuses at face value, saying, well, she doesn't want to impose, and she readies to leave, knowing that Irene will prefer the attention of the concert to being ignored. And that neatly flips the table on Irene. Irene agrees to participate without any more fake excuses. Rilla gets an accomplished singer at last minute, a healed rift with Irene, and the best prize of all, realizing that she now sees through and has matured past Irene's pettiness and cattiness.
Rilla is good at people.
Rilla is good at people.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about wisdom. She can clock someone's motivations pretty cannily. And her insightfulness into other people also gives her like a lovely little knack for writing letters, which ends up being a skill that makes her brothers laugh and feel hopeful even when they are off at the front. Walter tells Rilla, quote, "If it weren't for your letters, your dear, bright, merry, funny, comical, believing letters, I think I'd give up." Oh. As Rilla's going through her daily life, she's constantly sort of storing these funny events in her head and thinking about how she's going to tell them in her letters, at first to Jem and Jerry, and then to Walter, Ken, and Carl, and presumably Shirley as the war goes on.
We hope someone's writing to Shirley.
We hope someone is writing to Shirley. I think Rilla would. And then Rilla is the only person to intuit that Una loves Walter. She knows it before the book even starts. Maud tells us on the walk to the party that, quote, Una had a secret, carefully hidden fancy for Walter Blythe that nobody but Rilla ever suspected. And Rilla clocks the look on Una's face when Walter kisses her cheek goodbye at the train station. When Rilla shares Walter's last letter with Una, at Walter's request, she realizes that Una's heart is broken, but she won't ever be able to share that. Now, this is from Rilla's perspective, looking at Una's face while she's reading the letter. Quote, Una had so little, and her eyes were the eyes of a woman stricken to the heart, who yet must not cry out or ask for sympathy.
Something that really came up for us as we were writing this episode was how to distinguish Rilla's growth when it comes to cleverness and her growth when it comes to goodness. This was easier to do when we were talking about Anne, right? Because Anne had such a specifically academic cleverness. We could kind of section off the academic achievements, the writerly ambitions, and use those examples as Anne's more conventional textbook definition of cleverness, to use our D&D parlance, Anne's intelligence stat. Because Rilla's intelligence and cleverness is not career or academically related, much of her growth in this area overlaps with the ways that she is growing in goodness. Taking in gyms and running the Junior Reds both challenge Rilla to embrace her own type of cleverness and are good examples of her goodness. But I think the distinction we kind of realized we were making is that cleverness is the what and how Rilla interacts with the world, and the goodness is why. We can use another D&D framework for this. Another factor when you build your character is something that's called alignment. Essentially, whether your character is good, neutral, or evil, that's separate from your character stats. The stats determine your skills, how well you interact with the world, but your alignment is your why you make the decisions that you do. So some of the events we are talking about with Rilla here will come up again when we talk about goodness, but from an entirely different lens on that same event. So if we take this moment of Walter's last letter and Una, understanding that Una is in love with Walter and full of a grief that she cannot publicly express after his death is wisdom. Offering Walter's last letter for Una to keep is goodness.
As the years pass, sorrow, anxiety, and grief having become constant companions to Rilla and the other Ingleside inhabitants, it's clear that Rilla is growing in ways she couldn't have predicted. And in terms of our D&D stats, one last factor that's important to note, and maybe this is even getting a little more meta, but hey, we're already knee-deep in this, we're just going to keep going, is that D&D characters are constantly leveling up their stats by gaining lived experience. And sometimes a character gets to choose to grow a little bit more in a particular area than others. Just like real life, we gain wisdom and intelligence as we gain experience. And Rilla's experiences in these 4 years have sparked intense growth for her. So how do we think the Rilla at the end of the book would judge herself in wisdom and intelligence, in overall cleverness? And can she even see how different she is from where she started? And, I think she sells herself short at the end of the book, Reagan. What do you think?
I agree with you, Kelly.
Even toward that last year of the war, Rilla hasn't yet noticed the change in herself. Not really. She's reflecting that Nan and Di will be graduating from Redmond with their BAs, and she's still thinking to herself, quote, I am evidently to be the dunce of the family, but somehow I never had any hankering for a college course, and even now it doesn't appeal to me. I'm afraid I'm rather devoid of ambition. There's only one thing I really want to be, and I don't know if I'll be it or not. If not, I don't want to be anything, but I shan't write it down. It's all right to think it, but as Cousin Sophia would say, it might be brazen to write it down. No, I will write it down. I won't be cowed by the conventions and Cousin Sophia. I want to be Kenneth Ford's wife. There now. It's very...
I love the journey she's on in that paragraph.
I won't be cowed by Cousin Sophia. But, the humor aside, we see that Rilla is still sort of confusing academics and ambition with cleverness. By this point late in the book, she has proved herself to be extraordinarily capable, quick-witted, organized, insightful about people. So she's using this very narrow definition of cleverness for herself.
Right, especially to call herself a dunce.
Yeah, no, she definitely isn't. Come on.
We do see that Anne notices Rilla's growing maturity, how she allows herself finally to become clever. Anne observes in the first year of the war, when thinking about Rilla, how strong and clever and womanly she was growing, how patiently she knitted and sewed and manipulated those uncertain junior reds. And then, towards the end of the war, Rilla overhears Anne say this to Gilbert. Rilla has developed in a wonderful fashion these past 4 years. She used to be such an irresponsible young creature. She has changed into a capable, womanly girl, and she is such a comfort to me. I don't see how I could have got through these terrible years without her, Gilbert. Rilla is humbled by overhearing this, and she writes it down in her diary to reread when she feels discouraged or on days when she feels, quote, vain and selfish and weak, and that there's no good thing in me. She thinks, quote, it's beautiful to have my mother think that about me, but I don't deserve it quite. The older girls in the junior Reds notice it. Betty Mead, the president that Rilla picked, defends Rilla against Irene Howard's petty and passive-aggressive digs. Betty says, I think Rilla is just a wonderful girl. A few years ago, I admit I did think she was rather too vain and gigglesome, but now she is nothing of the sort. Our junior Red Cross would have gone on the rocks a dozen times if it hadn't been for her tact and perseverance and enthusiasm.
This is just something I'm thinking about now, but when we're talking about self-awareness being a component of intelligence, just the fact that Rilla, when she was sort of putting together the junior Reds to begin with, understood that she had this reputation of being like rather too vain and gigglesome, so therefore she did install a slightly more sedate older girl in the role of president. Like, Rilla is smart.
Also, I think we should use the word gigglesome more often.
Oh, I know. Why aren't we using that word? Gigglesome is, especially, Reagan, I have to say, in your household, that is a word that needs to come back into fashion.
Oh my God, Kelly. On Monday, I worked with my daughter's Girl Scout troop. So it's 10, 13-year-old girls. And we were trying to like have a fairly serious conversation about how do we handle phones in meetings. Oh my God, gigglesome. Absolutely to describe those girls. We got where we needed to go, but it took a minute.
I'm sure it did. And even the dour and pessimistic cousin Sophia is impressed, kind of despite herself. She says this to Rilla when Jims is about 2. Quote, I never thought you'd raise him when I saw him the day after you brung him home. I really did not think it was in you, and I told Albert's wife so when I got home. Albert's wife says she, there's more in Rilla Blythe than you'd think for, Aunt Sophia. Them was her very words. More in Rilla Blythe than you'd think for. Albert's wife always had a good opinion of you. Cousin Sophia sighed, as if to imply that Albert's wife stood alone in this against the world. But Cousin Sophia really did not mean that. She was quite fond of Rilla in her own melancholy way. But young creatures had to be kept down. If they were not kept down, society would be demoralized.
Oh my gosh, Cousin Sophia, gotta keep those young folks down. They might tear down society.
By the way, that was all the quote. None of that was my own.
Nope.
That was all Cousin Sophia.
That was all Cousin Sophia.
Rude.
I'm going to start trying to keep down the young creatures in my life so that society won't be demoralized.
Oh, yeah.
As the war winds down, Rilla realizes that she doesn't have any plans. After 4 years of feverishly working, she's still not inclined academically, and with Jims gone to his father, the Junior Red Cross disbanding, and no word from Ken, she feels at loose ends. It turns out she actually liked being capable and busy and having a purpose. But now she's casting around for a new purpose. She thinks, well, maybe she'll take a course of household science with Una in Kingsport. Not quite sure what that is. It's not a BA. And there weren't that many other options for women at the time if she wasn't going to teach or become a nurse. She has this whole host of new skills and new capabilities that she doesn't really know what to do with right now. Luckily, at that moment, Ken Ford arrives, and Rilla is thrilled. Here is her purpose. She wants to marry Ken. But Kelly, what do you think really happens with Rilla after this? She marries Ken, presumably, but then what? This young woman discovered so many new depths to herself, has discovered her cleverness and her wisdom. What will life look like in this new world that they want to build on the ashes of war? What do you think she does?
Well, I think that one reason we don't get any hint of what's in store for Ken and Rilla is because this book was written and published so soon after World War One, right? Like, I almost wonder if Maud is like a little afraid to imagine a life for them because she wasn't sure if the future world would be safe for them.
Right. She wasn't far enough out from World War One to know what it would look like yet.
Yeah. But I don't think Rilla's manifest intelligence and all these new skills are going to be wasted. You know, we don't know if Rilla and Kenneth move to Toronto or maybe they do settle on PEI, but I am certain that Rilla becomes a community leader and an organizer wherever they are. I can see her leading church groups and aid societies, raising money for good causes, and making everyone else feel like they are doing great work.
I agree. Rilla deserves a happily ever after, and her leadership and talent for organizing are going to be a boon to whatever community she ends up in. Well, let's transition to our Birch Path. So, Kindred Spirits, we turned over various ideas for a Birch Path today, but we really enjoyed using Dungeons and Dragons to discuss the idea of cleverness. So we thought, you know what? We're going to give you all a little more information on D&D. I mean, what's the point of having your own podcast if you can't smash together some of your favorite special interests?
Yes, please. I am here for this.
Okay, so stick with us. You will like this. Trust me.
Just a spoonful of sugar.
So both Kelly and I obviously play D&D. We were both introduced to the game by our husbands. And I have a funny story about this. I had been dating my husband maybe about 6 months, and I'd met a lot of his friends, and he'd met lots of mine. But there was one group of his friends that I had not met yet. A group he was so close to, he had a standing Sunday night dinner with them every week. But he had never introduced me to any of the people in this group, although obviously they were very important to him. Finally, maybe under pressure from me, he fessed up and admitted that this was because they were his D&D group and he hadn't wanted to tell me in case I thought it was too nerdy. But he did introduce me. They invited me to play. I had a great time with all of them and I loved playing. My years of reading fantasy novels meant I could just like fit right in.
Ugh, I love it.
Kelly, how did Chuck introduce you to D&D?
Well, it's a pretty similar story. He also had a standing date. He had a standing Wednesday night game night, which I assumed, like, he didn't tell me anything. I just, in my mind, told myself the story that it was a poker night because that was the year that, like, Texas Hold'em poker was, like, incredibly popular.
Right. It was everywhere.
Yeah. And he just never corrected my assumption. He was like, yeah, you go on believing that. So then one time though, I was invited to a Texas Hold'em party at my law school. And I asked him for like tips on how to play. I wasn't really clear on the rules. Whereupon I find out that he is also not clear on the rules because he confessed that his game night was actually for Dungeons and Dragons, which I did think was pretty nerdy, to be honest.
Well, you married him anyway.
I did. And then as it happened, I didn't really start playing until you and I became better friends. Because I think you were the person who explained to me that D&D was collaborative storytelling. I think the way Chuck had described it to me, it sounded like sort of like acting out a real life video game, but doing lots of math. And I don't need that.
Right. That's a really boring way to describe it. And that's funny because Chuck is a very good role player. Like he does different voices and everything.
I know. I think maybe he's trying to undersell it to me.
Maybe he didn't want you to enjoy it so that he had a thing of his own.
Well, that did not work out for him. Because when I finally did sit down to play for the first time, I think this would have been about 2009. We were probably pretty newly married. You and Steve would have been engaged, I think. So that's when I sat down and played for the first time. And as you know, I fell in love and fell in love hard. I honestly regret so much not playing D&D with the kids in my neighborhood who played when we were all growing up.
Well, playing together has been one of these fun things that we have done as friends and kind of as a larger group. We've introduced other of our friends to playing. We've played various games together, which are called campaigns. So if you're playing a long running game, that's called a campaign. And we played in other groups as well, separate from each other. And it's interesting that D&D is kind of getting this new, I wouldn't say resurgence, but like losing its stigma in popular culture over the last couple of years. Maybe partly thanks to the TV show Stranger Things, maybe partly thanks to the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which honestly, that movie is so great. Even if you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, it's such a fun movie.
That movie is so great. We just rewatched it and it is hilarious. It is so fun. Reggie John Page is so hilarious in it. I love that movie.
It's almost making me think a little bit of the way The Princess Bride was for us growing up. I feel like it's right in that's that space for it.
Yes, it's a funny fantasy adventure, a little bit heartfelt. I love that movie.
Right. A little bit campy, a little bit self-aware.
That movie rules. I can't, it should have done so much better at the box office than it did.
But back to our original topic, our tangent within a tangent. Essentially, Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game. It started in the mid-70s, and it was the original role-playing game. It was the origin of a lot of different types of role-playing games since then, RPGs for short, both tabletop and video games. It's evolved and grown over the years, and it's published by the company Wizards of the Coast. So D&D has a reputation for being for deeply nerdy, unpopular kids who are huddling in their basement yelling fireball at each other instead of going to dances with friends. But that's unfair and reductive. Folks of all ages and personalities play D&D, and it's a very social game.
Yeah.
Basically, think of your classic fantasy world, populated with wizards, fighters, archers, thieves, and you're going to go on a quest together. This is the basis of a million fantasy novels, right? Your classic hero's quest. Now imagine that you get to build a character to be in that story, and you and the other players are going to write the story together. That's what a D&D game is. The dungeon master or the DM is loosely controlling the story, plotting the basic encounters, playing the creatures or the villains you might come up against, but it's essentially collaborative storytelling. Kind of like a choose your own adventure book, but instead of choosing between two options at the end of the page, you can decide to do anything. You can choose none of the options. You can make up your own option. It's as open-ended as you want it to be. Multi-sided die are used as the game mechanic. Usually your primary die is a 20-sided die, and that's going to determine whether you succeed or not in anything you want to do. So whatever you want to do, you roll the die, and then you add any bonuses you might have from your character attributes to your roll to find out if you can do it. So fighting is an easy example. If you want to hit someone with your sword, you roll and you add your strength bonus. This gives it an element of luck, much like the real world. You can be a great swordsman, super strong, but if you roll a 1, the sword is going to fly out of your hand and across the room. You can be a very weak character who can barely pick up a sword and has never fought before, but if you roll a 20, you hit. You got a lucky strike. But you can do this with anything. If you want to charm the guard into letting you into the locked library, you roll and add your charisma bonus. If you want to understand some hieroglyphics in a tomb, add your intelligence bonus. If you want to find out if someone is lying to you, there's your wisdom bonus. And then depending on your character's species, think elf or human or halfling, that's basically a hobbit, or their class, that's their job, like wizard or fighter or rogue. For example, you're naturally going to be better or worse at certain things, and you have skills or spells that help you do things. And that's it. That's the basis of the game. What do you think, Kel? Did I leave anything significant out?
No, I think you got it. Those are the basics. And I think the most important takeaway from all that is that truly sky is the limit. It's a choose your own adventure where there are limitless options. And I think that's so much fun about it, right? You can be in a situation where there might seem like there are a couple of paths, but if you are looking at the roof and wondering whether or not there's a skylight, a good DM will say, well, okay, roll the dice and see if there's a skylight you can break through or some other thing, right? There's always another option.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want to. And the magic is in the shared creation. This isn't moving pieces on a set board, and you can play entire sessions without ever needing to put a piece on a board. This is about creating a story. Your DM will put you in a situation, but you decide what happens next. And it can sometimes be very fun to confound your DM and do something completely unexpected. We have done that all the time. One time, Kelly and I and our husbands, we were in a campaign with some other friends. Steve was DMing, and we managed to beat his dragon by doing something completely unexpected, which was run away.
Yeah.
He thought we were going to stay and fight, and instead we ran away and ended up luring the dragon someplace where it was much easier for us to fight it, and we won.
Good job, us.
Yeah, he was like, that was not the way that was supposed to go.
Well, and I wanted to pick up on one other thread there. You know, you said that sometimes you don't need to move pieces on a board. In fact, there usually isn't a board. There's this concept in D&D or in collaborative storytelling generally that's called theater of the mind, which is that we're all sort of in this imaginary space together, right? It might look different in everybody's minds, but we're building it all together. And so sometimes people do play D&D with like maps and little mini figurines and things like that, but you don't have to. You can literally be like sitting around a campfire, rolling dice in your lap, and telling a story with your friends. And that's very often how we play.
Exactly. People use maps maybe particularly for actual fights, like battles where it's useful to see where people are to help ground your mental picture.
Yeah.
Just in case any of you kindred spirits had any doubt about this, you should know that Kelly is a phenomenal role player. Like, she commits to her character. She role plays with flair and dramatic touches that really make her character three-dimensional.
Well, thank you so much. I think Dungeons and Dragons is just like perfectly calibrated for theater kids. We can just like channel all that creative energy into creating and becoming a new character and living their lives out. So, but I really love playing characters who take big swings and make big choices. I don't like playing it safe. I try to play characters that are like the characters that I like to read about. So brave and sassy women who are usually very unapologetic about their desires, I'll say.
Almost all of Kelly's characters are enormous flirts.
Yeah. In our most recent campaign, I played this like tinkerer character who was obsessed with gemstones and very likely would have sold out the entire party for a bag of rubies. And another favorite character of mine really leaned into the flirtation. She was a former courtesan turned adventurer, and she would very often use her feminine wiles to navigate the political intrigue in the story.
One of the best D&D moments I've ever witnessed was watching Kelly's courtesan character use her bardic songs to wheedle information out of a hard-bitten, nasty henchman and then make him fall asleep with a lullaby. It was mesmerizing.
We have fun. We have fun. I will admit I don't always play the smartest characters. In real life, I use my brain to solve problems. So in D&D life, I like to just sort of rush in and see what happens.
I'm more of a practical player. I generally play characters close to my personality because I'm not as good of an actress. So I'm good at keeping our group focused and on task. I generally
need her.
Yes. I am usually running after Kelly's character and like picking her up. This last game we played, I'm a dragonborn, which is like a humanoid dragon. And Kelly was this tiny little character. Were you a dwarf? No, you were a hobbit.
No, I was a gnome. I was a gnome.
You were a gnome, right? So tiny. And I think I literally physically just picked her up a few times, being like, nope, you sit over here.
She literally, like, yeah, my character would be running for some gemstone in the wall, and she'd be like, nah, that's not what we're doing right now.
Right.
Grab her by the scruff of the neck.
I'm usually like playing some kind of magic, a character who has some kind of magic or healing, but I've been a fighter too and just like bash things around with my sword when I'm in a tight spot. It's kind of fun to play that too. And then what's fun is once you're hooked on role-playing games in general, there are a million different universes that you can use this basic system with. We have played science fiction based games. We've played more steampunk inspired games. Kelly once ran a game with us that's still one of my favorites. That was a murder mystery on a haunted island. She also created a game based on our love of the Temeraire books. That's the Napoleonic War, but make it dragons books that we love. Right now, my daughter is planning the first game that she is going to DM for us, which is going to be based on Greek myths like Percy Jackson.
Yeah, it's just this like endlessly adaptable system. Doing that Temeraire game was so much fun because that was like a funky little special interest that you, me, and our husbands all had. We all read those books. We're like, we love this world. And I was like, well, heck, we all know this world. Why don't we set a game there? And it was phenomenal. We had so much fun.
We had a great time with that. Most D&D groups play regularly to continue telling one long story, like chapters in a book, right? So you gain experience, you learn new skills along the way, and then you can contribute to a larger story arc. But you can also play what are called one-shot adventures if you just want a single self-contained game. And that can be a fun way to try out new characters or learn a little bit or try out a new world.
I know what our group has been doing a lot of recently, and I'm loving it. We were having scheduling problems with getting a long campaign together, so we decided we would meet less frequently and try out new things every time we met. And so we've been doing that all summer. It's been so fun. It's been so good. We're trying new systems, new worlds. I get to make a new character every single time.
Right. And different people are getting a chance to try out DMing if they want, with less pressure to like commit to an entire campaign.
Yeah, it makes the stakes a lot lower and it's still just as fun.
Yeah, for sure. So if we have convinced you that this could be fun for you, all you need to get started are a set of dice, and almost everything else you need is online. Most game stores run in-person games if you want to try one out. And there are definitely online groups, or literally just ask around. You probably know somebody who plays.
You definitely know somebody who plays. If you listen to this podcast, you are enough of a nerd that you know somebody who plays D&D. But no, game stores is a great resource. Chuck and I actually just came back from vacation. We were staying in this super small town in the Northern California coast. And as we passed by, we saw this little game store, adorably called the Kobold's Lair. And it turned out they had a drop-in D&D game like every Tuesday night. And it happened to kind of not work out with our schedule, but we were so like pleased with the idea that like even on vacation, we could have just dropped in for a game for a night. So if this sounds interesting to you, yes, do just call up your local game store and they'll tell you when they're hosting games that you can just drop into. Generally speaking, D&D people are delighted to initiate newbies into this world.
Turns out that lots of people play or want to play. My husband just started a new D&D group with some parents in our orbit who had never played before, but were curious. Their kids were talking about it, and they are having the best time with it. I would not have predicted all of the parents that wanted to join either. There's a few that I was like, oh, no, this is right up their alley. But there's a couple who were interested that I was like, would not have guessed that. And they love it. I'm not playing with them. I just have other stuff I got to do. But I love wandering through and seeing them like cheer when they succeed. They've been trying to convince Steve to let them keep a bear they rescued as a pet.
Classic.
Yeah. If you ever hear muffled cheering or yelling in the background of one of our episodes, that's probably them playing in the other room. So it's out there. If you want to play, it's a really fun thing to explore.
Yeah, we love D&D.
Well, thank you for going on this random birch path with us, kindred spirits. I bet you did not guess this would be the birch path from the topic of this episode.
I think it fits.
I think we made it work.
Well, I think we covered everything today that's related to Rilla and the theme of cleverness. So we're going to skip our puff sleeves today. But Reagan, why don't you tell me what you are inspired by for this episode?
I am inspired by all these discussions of cleverness, intelligence, and wisdom, naturally. So I'm going to recommend the game Rush Hour for those folks who love a brain game. Rush Hour is a game with a little plastic grid and a bunch of plastic colored cars and trucks. And you arrange the cars and trucks on the board based on a puzzle card. And then you have to manipulate them to get the red car out the only exit. It comes with 50 puzzles that start easy and then get very complicated as you work your way through it. And then you can get expansion packs of puzzle cards once you've worked your way through the first set. My sister gave me this game years ago for Christmas. And it happened to be a Christmas that we were all with my very large extended family. And when I tell you the hold this game had on my family, everybody wanted to play it, from my cousins, my younger cousins, all the way up through uncles and aunts. I think I had to pry it out of my stepdad's hands to take home. He wanted to try like one more puzzle. And it's great because it's a real tangible game. It's not a video game or a phone game, and you can play it by yourself. The mechanic of it is simple enough that even young kids can understand. I've taught 5-year-olds how to do it, but the puzzles steadily get more complicated until they can stump most adults. So if you don't have one in your house, I highly recommend it.
That's such a good recommendation, Reagan. That is a really, really fun game. I played it with you only once. I think I might need to work on my patience and problem solving because I remember being very frustrated by it. But I do love a puzzle. I love a puzzly game in general. So along those same lines, I will be inspired by Myrtle. And Reagan, I know you love Myrtle too.
I do.
Now, I'm not saying Wordle. That's the New York Times puzzle where you have to guess the 5-letter word in 6 tries. I also love that. But I'm saying Myrtle, like murder. Oh. It's a daily puzzle. You can play it online at myrtle.com, or you can buy one of the books. I think there's 3 volumes out now. And these are logic games, sort of inspired by the game Clue. And the idea is that you have suspects, weapons, locations, and motives. And with just a small handful of clues, you have to use deductive reasoning to solve the murder. If you happen to take the LSAT at any point, you will recognize Myrtle as a version of a classic logic game where if you know that like suspect A had the knife, then you also know that suspects B, C, and D didn't have the knife, so they must have had a different weapon. And then you kind of go through all the clues until you can figure out all the matches, right? Who had which weapon, who had which motive, who had, who was in which room. Anyway, I love these puzzles so much. They kind of like sit right in my brain's sweet spot. It's just so funny how our brains work, because a lot of times I'll like read all the clues and I'll know the answer, but then I need to like take some more time to like actually prove the answer to myself. Getting to that proof is often very satisfying. So love it, love it.
Oh, I love a Myrtle. I didn't know you could play online, but I am on my second book.
Yeah, so find the Myrtle books. They are really, really fun. Great for like a plane activity too.
Yep.
Reagan, I think this might have been our geekiest episode ever.
We went kind of nerdy.
We really covered a lot of nerdy ground today. So that is about it for us today, kindred spirits. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope you will join us again in 2 weeks as we continue our discussion of Rilla Blythe. We will next be looking at her through the lens of the core value of goodness. And we will have a very special guest with us, Laura Robinson. She is one of our favorite LM Montgomery experts, so you are not going to want to miss it. Also, be sure to check out our guest appearance on the Swoonworthy podcast. We are talking all about the Anne of Green Gables miniseries. We will put the link in the show notes. We had such a fun time with Carly, and if you love the 1985 Anne of Green Gables miniseries, you're going to love our conversation. If you'd like to support the podcast, the simplest way is to leave us a 5-star rating or review, or tell a friend about us on social media. Every review and share helps new kindred spirits find their way here. And because we are so grateful for your support, we'll send you one of our beautiful Sage Green Kindred Spirits Book Club stickers totally free. Just email us a screenshot and we will mail it to you with a handwritten thank you note. Reach out to us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com or at kindredspirits.bookclub on Instagram. We would be so happy to hear from you.
Thanks for listening, kindred spirits.